Hi, Brian. Hi, Kacy.
Hey, Stephanie.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. It's great to talk to both of you. I am so eager to hear about your project. So we have a couple questions. The first is, I want both of you to tell us a little bit about where you work. Brian, why don't you start?
Okay, so my name is Brian Crane, and I am the archaeologist for the Historic Preservation Program in the Montgomery County Planning Department. So the Montgomery County Planning is a component of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, and the commission as a whole provides for parks and planning in the suburban counties of Washington D.C. and Maryland. So Montgomery County and Prince George's County, and the Historic Preservation Program maintains an inventory of all the cemeteries and burial sites in Montgomery County. And I'm the staff person that's responsible for maintaining that inventory and updating it, developing the guidelines for how we research those sites and what may be required for property owners and developers. So that's a short answer, I guess.
Well, Kacy, so I know you and Brian work together. Tell us a little bit about your role in the organization.
Sure. So I am a historic preservation planner, also in the Historic Preservation Office for Montgomery Planning. So I do a lot of historic research work. I work on our designation projects for historic sites and districts, and I work on area master plans and functional master plans for the county. So I think we're lucky in Montgomery County because of our geography. We get a really great range of different environments to work in, from both more sort of urban settings closer to the district, and then more rural areas out in the ag reserve. So I think we get to work on a lot of interesting stuff, and I think we have a great sort of collaborative relationship with the rest of our department.
For sure. Yeah. I think some people don't realize just how big Montgomery County is and how rural it gets once you get so far away from the city. Well, so to that point, Kacy, what is your favorite thing about your job?
Well, I guess back to what I was saying there, I really like working with all the different professionals from different backgrounds. I think working on master plan projects in particular, where a historic preservation team member is assigned to each master plan. So that means we get to work with people from a variety of different disciplines, from engineers and urban designers to environmental planners, and people who are bringing all sorts of different backgrounds to these projects that we're working on together. So I think it's a really great opportunity to learn from them. And then I think it's also nice to see how interesting people find the history that we're able to uncover and bring to these projects. So I really like that element of learning, but also sharing what we're learning and having such a good reaction to it.
Yeah, I completely agree. MNC PPC is a huge organization, and there's so many opportunities for partnerships there. There's so much overlap. Well, Brian, what about you as an archaeologist in the office? What's your favorite thing about your job?
Well, I'll piggyback on what Kacy said. It's really great to work in an interdisciplinary environment where we're working with experts from a wide variety of fields. And also for me as an archaeologist, while I'm the only archaeologist in the planning department, the commission has a bunch of archaeologists in our parks department, not only for Montgomery County, but also Stephanie for, for Prince George's County, where you.
Uh-oh, it looks like Brian froze a little bit. Well, you know what? We are going to let him come back. Yes, and it's true to his point. I do work for, full disclosure, I do work for Prince George's County Park, so I am one of the park archaeologists. So, Kacy, while we're waiting for Brian here, I want to hear about how you got into historic preservation and what keeps you in this field.
Sure. So I was working before I went back to grad school. I was working in environmental advocacy. And we were working with many southern coastal communities that were being seriously impacted by climate change. And I myself was living in Annapolis during part of that time. So it's really getting this exposure to seeing how historic communities and sort of cultural practices and all of these important elements were being erased by the sea level rise and climate change. So I really saw planning as a field to have sort of a direct impact on that and to sort of address the drivers of climate change. And I think historic preservation is a really important part of that because our built environment is extremely important, and our historic buildings have a major role to play, I think, in climate mitigation. On a day-to-day basis, I don't think I do that much directly involved with certainly sea level rise in Montgomery County, but I still feel like we're taking action to address the climate crisis. For example, in our office recently, we passed some new procedures to facilitate the adoption of solar panels in our historic sites and districts. So that was a really cool opportunity to sort of bring sort of my past work into what we're doing today. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of work still to be done in that, but I feel like we are contributing to that.
Oh, absolutely. The
That's
work
great.
is completely ongoing when it comes to the effects of climate change on all of our resources, but from our perspective, certainly from historic and archaeological resources. Brian, it looks like we got you back. So I want to hear how you got into archaeology and what keeps you in it all these years.
Okay. Well, I did just want to finish on what I like about my job.
That's okay, of course.
I love research and I love working with the public, and so I feel like I get an opportunity to help the community rediscover sort of forgotten landscapes and researching cemeteries that have sort of been lost and their locations forgotten. So recovering that for communities that really care about those places is very rewarding. And so what got me into archaeology, I'm kind of I've always enjoyed sort of the big picture of things and how figuring out how seemingly disparate phenomenon are connected. And so that for that reason, I've always really enjoyed interdisciplinary kinds of investigations. And archaeology is nothing if not interdisciplinary. I mean, there's sort of a joke that we're jacks of all trades but masters of none. It's sort of like, sort of like everything connects to archaeology at some point. So there's science, there's history, there's art, there's trying to understand what things meant to people. So it's very broad, it's very eclectic, it's very interdisciplinary, and I find that rewarding.
I completely agree, Brian. And I have to say, I think you do a great job at that, like connecting all those dots and like reaching out to different people. And, and it's an art form too, to be able to talk to other non-archaeologists about what we do and get them interested. So that brings me to the topic of your Maryland Archaeology Month essay. So Brian, why don't you get started and tell us a little bit about your topic?
So essentially we maintain an inventory of over 300 burial sites around the country of all ages, from the sites that are recent to ones that are a couple of hundred years old. And we get inquiries from the public about these sites all the time. And so a member of the public was interested in one of these sites. It's the Crab Family Cemetery, and it's one of our master plan historic sites. And they had gone to visit the site, and there was a headstone they were interested in that they couldn't read. And so the question was, did we know what the inscription read? So I went out, looked, and I took photographs of it, and I couldn't quite make all of it out either. But I did photogrammetry of the headstone, and photogrammetry lets you create a 3D model of an object or a landscape or really of anything. But so we did a 3D model of this headstone that allowed me to take all the color off of it. So all the sort of discoloration and sort of like algae or lichen growths on it, and then sort of create virtual light playing off it in different directions. And doing that helped pull out some of the inscription that was really hard to read in person or just from a photograph. And then Kacy helped me do some historical research about the other members of that, other people who were buried in that cemetery. So doing the photogrammetry pulled out some of the words, but not all of it. But when we did a little bit of genealogy on the other headstones that you could read plainly in the same graveyard, the pieces started to fall into place. And so we ended up with a sad story. And this was the headstone of Walter Orm, who died as an infant, if I'm remembering the right, Kacy. And we were able to tease that story out by looking at the other graves and figuring out the relationship of people buried there to each other. If you want to add anything to that.
Sure. So I think, Brian, you're breaking up a little bit again, but essentially we were able to look at the digital image generated through the photogrammetry and use that as a jumping off point to do this historical and genealogical research. Without that image, I don't think we would have known where to start with it. And the photogrammetry pulled out enough of the detail of the headstone that we could begin to understand the shape of the letters in the name, and from there get into some of our genealogical records that have been compiled by sort of volunteer and amateur historians in the county over many years already, and to cross-reference that with census data and marriage records in order to piece together the story of what happened to the Orm family. So I think it's this really great synthesis of sort of the old and the new methods to arrive at sort of the answer to this person who reached out to us with the question.
Really interesting. So when did he die?
1859.
Oh, okay, long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. And so the headstone had suffered significantly over the years and really was fairly degraded and hard to read.
So Brian, you've done so much work with photogrammetry. How do you think innovative technologies like this are going to be improved upon in the future to help archaeologists and historians and the public learn more about the past?
So I think that's a great question. I think in the case of photogrammetry, I think for my purposes, it's less about improving the technology than it is about getting more people to do it. So I think for headstones, the degree that headstones survive really depends on the material. And there are some materials, granite, Seneca sandstone, that are used in the county that really hold up very, very well over a very long period of time. But marble was also really popular, and marble doesn't hold up. It responds to acid rain. And so you look at some graveyards and it really seems like all of the headstones are just melting away over time. So all those inscriptions are slowly getting lost. So what I would like to see is to sort of be able to crowdsource, at least taking the photographs for photogrammetry. Processing them is kind of tricky and requires specialized software. But any digital camera can take the overlapping photographs that are the foundation for doing a 3D model that then would allow virtual manipulation and possible recovery of the inscription. So I want to crowdsource that so that we have a way of preserving more of these inscriptions before they're lost. Because once they're gone, if we don't record them, all that information about all that genealogical information and relationship about, or information about relationships, across people within a cemetery or within a community, we just won't have that anymore. So that's kind of what I want to see is training more people to use this in the field so that we're able to preserve these fragile and vulnerable resources before they're lost.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just a ton of information that you can get off of what otherwise seems like a simple inscription.
Right.
Kacy, I'll give you the last word. Do you have anything to add?
Sure. Well, I guess just to build on what Brian said, I think we're really lucky in Montgomery County to have a very sort of active and interested group of residents who care a lot about local history and are very knowledgeable about county history and community history and family history, which is really important for these burial sites. So the more we can get this out into the hands of people in the community, the more we can tap into that existing knowledge base. And I think that's a really important connection for us to make in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well, I want to thank you both so much. We got through it, even technology issues aside. It was great to talk to both of you, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Exactly. Take care.